from the deserts of Africa to the mountains of Europe, in ancient Egypt, meanwhile in China, in Europe, in medieval France, in India, in the mountains of Austria and Germany, in Italy, even in the New World, it was no longer just food, it became chemistry. Before Rockefeller had oil, and before Carnegie had steel, America's first great monopoly was salt. In the ancient world, there was no refrigerator, no way to keep food from spoiling. People depended on one thing to survive: salt. It preserved meat, fish, and grain, keeping armies alive and kingdoms fed. Without salt, food rotted, lives were lost, and nations fell into chaos. It wasn't just a seasoning, it was survival. And that's why, for centuries, salt was worth more than gold. From the deserts of Africa to the mountains of Europe, people searched for it, traded it, and killed for it. It built cities, funded empires, and started wars. The story of salt is the story of civilization itself. In ancient Egypt, along the banks of the Nile, the scorching sun dried the shallow pools of water, leaving behind white crystals that sparkled like jewels. Those crystals were salt. The Egyptians harvested it carefully, storing it in clay jars, and trading it with neighboring lands. It preserved their food, it was used in religious ceremonies, and it played a sacred role in mummification. They believed salt could protect the soul for eternity. As centuries passed, salt became the lifeblood of trade across Africa. In the Great Mali Empire, caravans of camels moved slowly across the Sahara Desert. They carried bars of gold south, and in return, brought blocks of salt north. Gold and salt were traded at equal value. In some places, salt was considered more valuable because without it, people couldn't live long enough to enjoy their gold. Meanwhile, in China, salt became a symbol of absolute power. Thousands of years ago, Chinese emperors realized that whoever controlled salt controlled the people. So they created a government monopoly. They didn't just tax salt, they owned it entirely. Salt works were guarded like military bases. Farmers, merchants, and fishermen all answered to the emperor's salt officials. The profits were massive. The salt tax helped build cities, pay armies, and finance the expansion of the Chinese Empire. In Europe, salt shaped entire economies. Venice, the glittering city of the sea, built its fortune not on gold or silk, but on salt. The Venetian Republic became one of the richest powers in the Mediterranean by controlling the salt trade routes. Its ships carried tons of salt from the Adriatic coast to distant ports, selling it at enormous profit. Every sack of salt unloaded on Venetian docks was another stone added to the empire's glory. But where there is profit, there is greed. And where there is greed, there is conflict. In medieval France, salt was more than a necessity, it became a burden. Kings imposed a heavy tax known as the gabelle. Every citizen, rich or poor, was forced to buy a fixed amount of salt at a price set by the crown. The poor suffered the most, and resentment spread like wildfire. Smuggling salt became an act of rebellion. Men and women carried it in secret through forests, rivers, and mountain passes. They were called faux sauniers, the false salt makers. Thousands were arrested, some even executed, all for defying a system that turned survival into a privilege. That injustice fueled anger that burned for generations. By the time the French Revolution erupted, salt taxes were one of the many symbols of royal oppression. People no longer wanted salt from the king, they wanted freedom. Across the sea, another empire discovered salt's power, the British Empire. In India, salt was everywhere, along the coast and in the air. The British knew it was essential for every meal, every home, every life, so they claimed it as their own. They taxed it ruthlessly, forcing Indians to pay for the very salt that came from their own shores. Then in 1930, one man decided enough was enough. Mahatma Gandhi, armed with nothing but determination, began a march that would change history. He walked 240 miles across India, from his ashram to the sea, joined by thousands of followers. When he reached the shore, he bent down, picked up a handful of salt, and held it high. That simple act, quiet, peaceful and defiant, shattered the illusion of British control. The Salt March became a symbol of resistance. Salt became freedom once again. But the wars over salt were not always fought with protests and marches. Many were fought with swords and cannons. In the mountains of Austria and Germany, princes and bishops fought bitterly over salt mines hidden beneath the earth. These mines were the beating heart of their economies. Whoever controlled them became rich. Whoever lost them faced ruin. Whole armies clashed in the narrow valleys, not for gold but for the right to sell salt. In Italy, cities went to war over salt routes. Venice and Genoa blockaded rival ports, starving them of salt until they surrendered. Salt became a weapon of starvation, a tool to bend cities and kings to one's will. Even in the New World, salt continued to shape destiny. During the American Revolution, the British Navy blockaded ports to cut off salt supplies to the rebellious colonies. Without salt, the Continental Army couldn't preserve meat, and soldiers went hungry. George Washington himself wrote letters begging for salt, calling it essential for victory. Years later, during the American Civil War, salt once again became a strategic resource. The Confederate South relied heavily on the salt works of Virginia. Those salt mines were so crucial that both sides sent thousands of men to fight for them. At Saltville, Virginia, fierce battles erupted, cannons roared, smoke filled the sky, and men died, all to control the salt that kept armies alive. Through every era, salt proved itself not just a mineral, but a measure of power. It built empires and destroyed them. It fed the rich and starved the poor. It united people and divided nations. When the Industrial Revolution came, salt changed again. It was no longer just food. It became chemistry. It was used to make soap, glass, dyes, and gunpowder. In New York, the Onondaga Salt Company built massive salt fields that became one of the earliest industrial monopolies in America. The system of centralized production and ruthless control it created would later inspire oil barons and steel magnates. Before Rockefeller had oil, and before Carnegie had steel, America's first great monopoly was salt. But progress has a way of burying its own history. When refrigeration arrived, salt began to lose its throne. Suddenly, food could be preserved without it. Salt was no longer the currency of survival. What was once a symbol of wealth and empire became an everyday commodity, sold for pennies in markets and packed in paper bags. Yet salt never truly disappeared. Its value shifted, but its presence remained everywhere, in our oceans, in our blood, in our tears. It is still a part of us, in every sense of the word. Even our language remembers it. The word salary comes from salt, because Roman soldiers were once paid in it. Salvation shares the same root, a reminder of how deeply it was tied to life itself. The story of salt is the story of us, our hunger, our ambition, and our endless struggle for control. It reminds us that power doesn't always come in glittering gold or shining jewels. Sometimes, it hides in the simplest things, the things we touch every day and forget. Empires rose because of it. Wars began because of it. Revolutions ignited because of it. And though centuries have passed, its lesson remains the same. Value often hides where we least expect it. Salt taught humanity that survival has a price, and that greed knows no boundaries. It showed us that the smallest grain can decide the fate of nations, and that sometimes, the most ordinary things hold the greatest power. So the next time you sprinkle salt across your meal, remember this: you are holding history in your hand. The same salt that fed kings, mummified pharaohs, sparked revolutions, and changed the world. It's a reminder of how fragile civilization truly is, and how everything we take for granted was once fought for, traded for, and died for. Because once upon a time, salt was the taste of power itself. And as the last grains fall through history's fingers, one truth remains: wealth is not always measured in gold or jewels. Sometimes it lies in the ordinary, the things that sustain us, the things that seem small but rule the world. Salt shaped empires. It shaped humanity. And its story is the perfect reflection of what Wealth Untold stands for: the hidden fortunes that built our world, the forgotten empires that rose from the simplest desires, and the lessons that still echo through time. This is Wealth Untold, and that was the Salt Wars, when salt was worth more than gold. If you think wealth has always been about gold and diamonds, think again. History shows us that sometimes the greatest treasures are the ones hiding in plain sight. Join us next time on Wealth Untold, as we uncover another forgotten empire, another story of power, greed, and fortune.